We're live here to chat about hobby
Yep,
related things. Greg, Eric,
yep, here we
Hey,
are. We're
how's
here.
everyone? How's everyone doing?
I'm doing okay.
I am
Perfect.
also doing okay.
Perfect. I'm fine as well. So I guess the biggest thing happening more recently, hobby related, or one of the more widely talked about things, was the Nova Open that happened this past weekend. Games Workshop was actually there and revealed mostly Space Marine stuff. So I guess we can talk a little bit about some of that tonight. Though I guess before
Mhm.
that, I guess we should give a shout out to our blog and tell people if they're interested in reading more about the event we just took part in, the Wrath of Hondius. We finally have released a series of battle reports on the three games that I played in and sort of tried to tie them together and have kind of a greater narrative over them. So, if that at all interests you, feel free to go and read through it. Lots of pictures and a fair amount of text, too.
Yeah. No, I feel it was took a long time writing it up together, but I think it's pretty good and
Yeah, it's good. It's quite good.
probably one of our best, I think.
Yeah, quite narrative. Maybe even makes it sound neater than it was. I don't know.
I
It
mean,
was
I think
pretty
it.
neat.
I for me, I would say me playing in it, like I did almost nothing in any of the games that I played in, but I think overall a lot of that actually sort of fed into the narrative, and the
Yeah.
things that did happen made sense and you could justify it relatively easily, and it sort of felt right. um I could see very easily something like that could not feel right. But for kind of the story we were going for and the characters we were developing, it worked out very well.
Mhm.
um and I think some of the happenings, sort of random happenings that happened in the actual games, based on somewhat based on dice rolls and stuff like that, were also quite thematic and interesting, and I think allowed for us to sort of capitalize on that and build in additional narrative and other kind of
One
fun
thing,
things.
this is actually um we got a question I think on our Discord channel, which I guess shout out people can join our Discord. We'd love to have you there. You can find that, I think, off to the side of our blog on a banner there. But someone in the Discord asked if we took notes about um,
The
the
battles that we're
games.
playing.
Yeah, to help with these. And I have not done that, and I don't think you did in any of these
No.
battle reports, Adam. But like, what do you think about that? Do you think that would be helpful, or like just one more thing to do in an already hectic time? Like,
So
yeah. Well,
it's
what
a
are your
good
thoughts?
idea, honestly. And I think, at least for me, when I was playing it, I was under the impression that I was going to be able to write the battle report very quickly. Um, I didn't. And a lot of that was just because it was a lot of work putting together all the images and trying to build a narrative around it, which it wasn't necessarily there from the start. Though I think having a little notebook at hand at an event like this, it would be probably a neat thing to jot down some of, like, a few things that you thought were interesting and cool to, like, sort of
I
help you
think,
with that.
yeah, that's a good, and even if it's just, and this would probably make more sense, like right at the end of the battle, like what were some of the highlights or something like that, I think could be helpful. Like I think doing the play by play would be a bit
Yeah.
much, like
Um.
because
Yeah, I think that would be too much. But I guess one other thing, I tried to take a lot of pictures to sort of document the battle, and I was
yeah.
hopeful that that would sort of I would sort of remember most of the happenings from those pictures, and I think that was mostly true.
And in
Um,
some sense, this was an effort also to like look back on the pictures, think back on the game, but then also try to inject additional narrative into it, like put in motivations for characters, stuff like that, which
yeah.
isn't necessarily just there. So some of it is kind of injecting additional information into there based on the general framework of what happened, I think.
Yeah, so like in the battle report, we didn't necessarily do like play by play and then such and such moved up here. Like um it was sort of more of a general flow of the battle, and we would emphasize certain things more than others, partially based on those were the images we had, and partially just based on that would flow together well and sort of make sense in a narrative. But
Yeah.
I think Anna would sometimes would take relatively detailed notes about the games that were played, and then would go back and sort of set up the game again to take better pictures and stuff for battle reports and stuff like that. So I could certainly see that working out well, depending on how much time you have. And um,
That is a lot of effort though.
yeah, it's a huge amount of effort. But if you really wanted to stage nice photos and everything, that would probably be the way to do it, because it's hard to get those photos, and particularly on the different boards and such. It's tricky. And I think overall, a lot of the photos in the post I think turned out quite well. I think most of them were ones that Eric, you had taken with a nicer camera and stuff.
Yeah. I feel that sort of speaks to the thing that like if you have someone who's just actually trying to actively take photos, that helps a lot.
Yeah, it
But
does.
I mean that makes a lot of sense.
Um, but yeah. So taking notes and stuff, that is honestly a good idea, particularly if you have a notion that you do want to write something up. Um, but yeah, in this case, I was thinking based on my recollection of the battles and the photos that got me most of the way there. The trickiest was the final battle, which almost everyone took part in, and that was harder to work together all the details. And for that, I actually, Eric, you and I reached out to some of the other players to sort of confirm details and stuff like that. But for the most part, with this, we were constructing a narrative out of what happened, and like we wrote in certain motivations and things for some of the characters and stuff that
Hmm.
we just came up with that. Whether or not that's what the creators intended and stuff, I mean, who knows? Hopefully you like it, everybody.
Yeah, I think it turned out quite
Yeah.
well.
I wonder if spending too much time trying to take notes about what's happening could maybe make
The
pull you out
experience,
of the
but yeah.
experience a little bit and could be maybe be a little bit tiresome.
So that's why I think if you were doing it, you could take pictures throughout the battle of different moments and stuff, but then at the end of the battle, jot down some notes about important occurrences and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I think that's would be the way to go about it. Because yeah, you don't want to be almost like a bad sport.
Yeah.
and like not fully occupied there, but afterwards, I think it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it's a good battle report. People should read it if they haven't. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, so that's one of the main things that we've been working on recently. We finally got that out. I guess, do we want to talk briefly about some of the models and stuff that were shown at Nova?
Yeah, I feel we can.
I even find them.
Well, is anybody playing Starfield? Starfield was just released today, I think.
I
I'm
think it
obviously
was
not.
today.
It was today. Lifeboat says they are. Yeah, no, I'm not. I've started to play Baldur's Gate
I
though.
don't see how Starfield could be better, honestly. I envision huge lifeless worlds and other shit. Like, um, I yeah, I I don't see it being great. I
Yeah,
feel it could eventually become great, but I don't
I he-
envision it.
I've also heard at the beginning it's kind of a slog, but
Okay.
that but it is still the best of those Bethesda type games.
I
And I
guess I
could
think
see
yeah.
some aspects of the space exploration being pretty neat. Although, being that it's such an expansive setting, probably with hundreds of planets or something, I could see eventually, after playing it for a while, like the wool being removed from your eyes and it being like, oh, I go to every planet, they're one of three things that could happen or something. And it's just kind of, not
Yeah, I'm
cool.
I think I'm
But
sort
I
of
don't know.
past the point where like I don't know if I'll ever play a Bethesda game again. Like I've done that before and um yeah, I don't need that. Maybe it'll change, but
Says it's got a cool atmosphere more so than Baldur's Gate. It's great. It's thus far I've been playing Baldur's Gate. It's been the writing seems pretty good. The storyline and stuff seems relatively compelling and interesting. Like
mhm.
I like it so far. Um I still think of all the RPG type stuff I've played, Disco Elysium is by far the best for the type of game I'd want to play. That's very, very focused on interesting characters and so forth, and an intriguing setting that isn't like there's not much combat in there to like get in the way or like, oh, but this is a game, so there needs to be shooting or something.
Yeah.
Like it had the wherewithal and the knowledge of what it was trying to do to like remove that shit, and it didn't suffer from it. I think it was better because, to be honest, I'm enjoying Baldur's Gate 3, but some of the combat is a bit tedious. But
Okay.
it's very much like
Dungeons and Dragons.
all those isometric 40 like D&D games that
Mhm.
like you kind of just want to get back to the talking and the like pushing forward storylines and stuff, and you fiddling around with like destroying an explosive barrel or trying to, I don't know,
I don't know.
isn't
Yeah. All the
as
Dungeons
isn't
and Dragons I've played, none of the combat was ever very satisfying.
well. And it's interesting with this, like those other, like the other Baldur's Gate, it like really is pretty much a as close to a one-to-one representation of those mechanics, which is, I guess, perhaps that's more fun than, or I don't know. It seems interesting to me that it's just like, yeah, these things can work all right in a video game, but like if you were playing in the theater of the mind, pen and paper thing, like I can only imagine that shit's fudged all the time because like who cares?
Yeah.
Like, oh, you can run this many feet and you can
Yeah.
make you can make one attack, but at level 5 you can make an additional attack and but you need to be this close to do it, or you know what I mean, like all that little finicky tactical shit. Like you can only imagine isn't that precise. I guess
Yeah.
if you're using miniatures, maybe it is. And like I feel that's maybe better. Like it doesn't need to be this finicky, like, oh, you're just short of doing that, like being in striking distance. So like you can't do anything now, or I don't know.
Yeah.
It makes
Yeah.
Yeah,
me
like
think of
playing D&D in real life, like the dungeon master can like change things to make the experience more fun for the players, whereas in this, like it just does what it's programmed to do. So maybe
but it
some
is
of the more
interesting that like all the innumerable little spells that do all this shit, like they do the stuff. And like so it's almost I'd be interested in like the people who wrote fifth edition, like what do they think about this game? Like
that
is
would
that
be
what they
interesting.
envisioned these
Mhm.
characters and the classes to be, how the subclasses work? Like are these balanced? Like things of
Well, did
that
you play
nature.
any of the other Baldur's Gate games, Eric?
I played a little of the first, but not really enough to
Because
like a couple hours.
okay, because in the second one, doesn't it start out with these like Nautilus ships and shit, and like people with
Third one starts out that way.
oh, okay.
Maybe the second does too. I don't know. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
cool.
I don't know, but it makes me think a little bit about the classic Planescape Torment, which was like an advanced Dungeons and Dragons, so like second edition D&D, and that was amazing. Like really interesting, cool characters, good storyline, character development, all that stuff. The
Combat
worst
stuff.
thing was that you had to do combat sometimes, and you could sometimes get away with not doing it based on talking and if you're charismatic or enough wisdom or whatever.
Hmm.
But it was the closest to a Disco Elysium type game, but it just didn't have like it was too tied to the fact that this was a pen and paper thing and we need these rules and we need these
Yeah,
things in them that they didn't just jettison it all. And it would have been better had they done that. And
yeah, okay.
this game maybe seems a little like it's still like a D&D fantasy thing. They wanted it such that you could do combat or you could be a druid or you could steal shit or like you could do all those things. So like they kind of had to include it all. Like they couldn't focus it, but it seems like they've done a pretty good job of like if
Yeah,
you're pretty charismatic, you can approach stuff in a different way and not have to fight that much or whatnot. So I think it seems like it's been the best of those type of games that I've played so far. But like Disco Elysium was like a step in another direction, one that I like better. That's just like, no, this is a detective thing. Detectives investigate stuff. They're not always shooting stuff. Like you don't even have your gun in the beginning because you lost it in the drunken stupor. Um, and maybe you
oh
get it
great.
back.
Yeah,
But and I think that like maturity and realization is like it doesn't just have to be like all the other RPGs was really to its credit.
yeah,
It didn't need to have like let's have 10 different other characters that you could get in your party and romance them if you want to. Like they didn't have to have every RPG crutch like in there just because they're saying it's an RPG.
hmm, yeah.
But yeah. Well, we don't need to keep talking about this, but Baldur's Gate 3 seems good. I mean, maybe sometime I'd like to play Starfield, but I don't want to spend $70 on it, and I so much anticipate it being another Bethesda game, even if it's better in some ways. And because of that, I'm not rushing out for it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I think we should talk about Space Marine stuff. I thought first we can talk about the Horus Heresy stuff. They have a plastic version of
Deradeo or
yeah, and that's cool. I'm glad they made that. It's a neat, interesting model. We can move
yeah,
on from that.
yeah, I have a resin version of it that
Is
like I
cool.
wonder if you can buy the weapons separately. Like yeah, so it's cool. It's good they've sort of rounded out the Dreadnought thing, but there's not that much to say other than it's nice to have one less resin thing.
Yeah. Um, the bigger thing was they finally showed more images of a newly redesigned Mark III iron armor kit, and pictures of these had been floating around for a while due to some pictures from maybe one of the books or something. And I know throughout some of the different community sites, there were, at least from what I could gather, a lot of heated debate over these new Marines.
I think there was some people I think were just upset that they aren't quite the same design as
Yeah.
the Forge World ones, like they're that not
Mm-hmm.
as much of the ribbed armor design and such. And like I couldn't care less about that really. Like I think these were made to look a little bit more like some of the original concept sketches of them. And like
And they,
that's fine. Like
yeah.
and I don't really care if it's different in that regard. Like I'm not someone who has 40 of the Forge World ones or the old plastic Mark IIIs and like these look different. Like that doesn't bother me.
No,
Um
doesn't bother me at all.
what bothers me is they just look really badly proportioned. And from the sounds of it, and I didn't do as much sleuthing about this, but it sounds like these are almost like a mirror image of the Mark VI models,
I think they
like
are
the
based on their
Beakies, like
poses.
the exact same poses, just like reskinned.
Mm-hmm.
And that probably means the bodies are pretty similar and everything's pretty similar. But for whatever reason, these models, well, I know the Mark VI Beakies weren't perfect, like, but their proportions still seemed better than previous ones, even if they weren't like like perfect. But for whatever reason, these appear much worse in my opinion. Like they are truly all legs, really tiny bodies, not as much of a torso as you would want, no necks to speak of. And I'm just trying to determine how is that true? Like, are there subtle differences here compared to the Mark VI that
Well, so I
bears that
think,
out?
yeah, I think if you look closely at the Mark VI Marines, um, it's a little hard to tell kind of where things start and where things end. Like if you look closely at them at the back of them, they sculpted their actual butts. And if you look at the placement of that with the rest of the body, I feel it does an okay job of approximating an actual torso. And
Okay.
then their legs don't look quite as all legs, but just based on how the armor balloons out and the feet are even bigger than before, it makes them look worse. And then all of that's compounded by the fact that their like hands are smaller and their heads are smaller. And I think for these models here, since their poses are the same, aside from the two that are walking, the other poses are downright atrocious. They just look bad. And I think these helmets, how they have like the pointy chin and then it like cuts upwards, that just makes their helmets and heads look even smaller. And I think all of the proportions look off. Like the heads are too small, and then the feet still remain really big, and it to me it just gives the comical pinhead Space Marine look to a T.
Which, because like the Mark 6 one, like I painted one that you had converted. Like you extended the neck a little bit, I think, right?
Yeah, I did a little bit, but not a whole
So
lot.
yeah, because I'm trying to look at some pictures of it, like because it would be interesting to see these Mark III, like what their backs look like towards that end to try to assess like
Also, if
what's
you look,
torso,
yeah,
what isn't.
if you look at some of these ones where they don't have the helmets on, like they honestly to me look better. Though part of that is also due to the fact that the ones without helmets are the ones that have the only two reasonable leg poses, like the walking ones. Um, that I
The
think,
non-helmeted heads look kind of cool.
yeah, I
Yeah, I
think
think yeah, these are hugely hurt by the fact that they're reskins, and it was the same thing the main thing we disliked about the Mark 6 was
that
only like two of the poses were okay. The others were wide, stupid poses. So there are only five poses. The fact that these maintain that is just terrible. I think that's the worst part.
that's the worst
Um,
part. Followed closely by their redesigned bolters, which look atrocious.
yeah, they like it's funny that they almost like taper from the front to the back. Like the
Hmm.
front part of the black casing is taller than the back part for some reason.
Mm.
The shells are gigantic. The muzzle flare, like holes, like one's
What's
big,
even
one's
happening?
small.
Yeah,
They're
they're
they're just
awful.
they're just really weird looking, and it doesn't make sense really. Like, why did they change this? Like the Phobos pattern bolter from Forge World thing was kind of an iconic look, and it was pretty nice. Um, there was no reason to change this, but they did here. They still have the broken wrist to like hold the bolter out straight. Like,
Yeah.
it would be fun or interesting to compare these to other like the Mark 6 and stuff. But something also about like I wonder if the bodies look smaller because the plate armor looks thicker and bigger, but then underneath that, like you get the sense that like the actual torso portions were constricted smaller to fit the thicker plate. I'm not describing this very well, but it's almost like they should have made, even if they used the same pose and was doing everything the same, they should have just made the torso a little bit broader because thicker armor is on there. But to me it appears as though they like kept the exact same volume. The torso volume is the same as the Mark 6 despite them trying to make it look thicker, so therefore the torso and body underneath is smaller. I don't know. They're just
Their arms also look smaller and frailer than I would think they should.
yeah, I think it's a lot of the leg poses and the bolters are just awful. But then I think a lot of little things from the Mark 6 that were okay but could have been better get compounded in this release
Yeah.
and they become worse. Like
I think they're pretty okay. The leg poses are bad. The bolters are the worst.
I feel
Um,
it would be kind of fun to like somehow get one and convert it a bit, make it look a little bit better. Could be fun, but it's just one of those things. Like 80% of the box like you don't want.
Yeah, I would be interested in building one similar to the Mark 6 Marines that I made for you, Eric, and you painted. Like, I would consider doing that, and also converting a new bolter and I think
If you
they
were
look a lot
asked,
better.
like, because I think I saw a poll on Instagram, like, which models do you, maybe it was even Lunex did it, which is your favorite Mark III? The old awful Forge World, the like plastic Mark III that was with that
Plastic.
one box set, or
Yeah,
these? Like, which is the best?
those plastic ones by far.
So the second one or these ones?
The second one.
Yeah, I thought so
Oh,
too.
by
Because yeah,
far. Like,
I
not
think
even
these
close.
arms, like you're saying, Adam, is another similar thing. Like when I look at the arms of the Mark Six, they don't scream out to me like super small. Like they maybe are a little small, thinking that there's like an arm in there and the armor is thick, but it doesn't strike as like really weird. But these ones, they really do, and it almost because they make it look like the greave portion is really thick armor, but to have that there, it like necessitates like the arm underneath has to be thinner, similar to
So,
what I was trying to convey
yeah.
about the body.
One thing that I think I've heard some people, I've watched around people talking on YouTube and stuff, and a lot of people, the older plastics, which we are saying are our favorites, they really didn't like how big their heads were. Like, I think
Hmm,
their heads are a little larger, so, like, I almost think you could just use their heads on these dudes, and they'd look better.
I think they
And
would.
you'd have to do something with the neck as well, because the necks on these are shit. But,
But I think that wouldn't take a huge amount of work to make these okay. But to have
yeah.
to do that on every single model, replace every single gun,
And
sculpt the neck
use,
for all of them, it's like just a lot of work.
and
And
not
then to
use
have
half
them,
the legs.
yeah, and then to have them all look identical to your Mark Six, it it's a bit too phoned in to be satisfying.
Yeah. But I think I would like to build one and try and replace its head with one of the old plastic heads and see how it works. Like,
We have some of those plastics, maybe, probably.
I think we do somewhere, yeah. I think I do. Unless we gave them away to someone, which could have happened.
Yeah, I don't know.
But we can look. Okay, so we talked a lot about them. Overall, I'm not happy with them.
It's like they're not enough of a change and they're not really an improvement such that it's like why did they even bother
Yeah,
when they could have like made new assault marines, like made something that people actually needed or wanted, but
yeah. Of the new Space Marine shit that's coming out alongside of all the Tyranid stuff, I don't think we'll talk about all of these tonight, but of all of these things here, which do you want to talk about?
I mean, I think it's perhaps worth saying that like we anticipated, it appears that the multi-part plastic terminators poses are a little
Oh,
bit
yeah, let's.
inferior to the ones
We
that
need to
were
look
just
at the
in the
chaplain.
Leviathan box.
We need to look at the chaplain.
Here's the chap one. He actually looks okay. So
Chaplain?
the like the half skull mask, that Reaver skull, that has to die. Like the Reaver
Yeah, like
skulls look comical and stupid.
I think he looks kind of cool.
But the
I think
Reaver
he's
skull thing
okay.
looks stupid.
I saw somebody on Instagram saying that like they thought everything from the new release was cool except this Terminator Chaplain looks bad. Like
No, I don't agree
I don't
with
even know what
that.
they're talking
I
about.
think
Yeah,
he
I don't
looks
even know.
pretty good. His pose isn't awful.
But it still has all the hallmarks of things that are almost there but could have been
Look at
better.
how his
Like I
arms attach.
like
They're terrible. That's
yeah,
terrible.
I feel and the fact that he doesn't have a helmet, like it removes any suspension of disbelief and the
I bet
arms
they
look
have a
Oh,
so
come on.
high.
helmet.
Chest armor with kind of ribcage stuff. Like this is a model that you could take, convert it, and make cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's disappointing that it has the loincloth purity seal, because that it seems like that made the
Maybe
pose
glued
a
on.
little bit worse.
But I think you could
Yeah.
remove it, and still,
It's
despite that, the
okay.
pose isn't quite as bad. Well, like if you scroll down and look at the captain in Terminator armor, this is bad. Like this is a bad pose. Um, you can't get rid of that tabard. He's like literally squatting down to take a shit or something.
I mean,
Um,
I think it's I mean, probably not universally agreed, but lots of people don't like the tabard underneath the armor,
oh, everyone
and like I
hates
don't
it.
really
Oh,
like
I
it.
didn't even realize
And
that.
Everyone
like
hates it.
in this case, it made the pose bad, and like you wonder, it almost seems like they wanted to put the tabard, and therefore it would make sculpting the cloth more of a pain, because like what the leg is gonna do. So they just forgo all of that and make them really wide so it can just hang straight down. But it's still gonna get in the way of him. Like he wouldn't want that. And like I feel if they just hadn't done that, hadn't had that tabard thing there, they probably wouldn't have had a pose like this because it's a weird, unengaging pose.
Yeah, I this the captain in Terminator armor is fine, but his pose is atrocious, and that I feel I honestly don't see why anyone would buy it. It doesn't
And
look
like it
good.
almost seems like you could just get a regular Terminator, one of the newer
Yeah.
multi-part ones, and make a model very similar to this that is cool. Like there's no this doesn't need to exist. This model.
Yeah, they didn't. The pose is just downright awful.
Interestingly, the sword arm pose, like how the arm's close to his body and with the head and stuff, it kind of looks
Though,
a little bit better than I anticipated.
well, but they also have right below this captain, they have another one that was built,
Mm.
and it looked like, is this an Iron Hand?
Yeah, yeah,
Where
yeah.
so it is interesting and cool that you don't have to have the tabard, but since it's an option, it just destroyed all the poses that exist. But it
Without it, it does make the pose not look quite as wide, I admit. It's still really
yeah.
wide and bad, but it does look slightly better just without it overall. And like the helmet he has is kind of cool. So like I guess that's the reason this exists, to have like a combi, to actually give you a plastic combi bolter and some like details like that. But for
Yeah.
$40 or $50, like this, well, it's just really sad that because of that loincloth edition, they ruined the model. They ruined the potential of the
Yeah.
model because of that bad pose. Otherwise, and I mean, obviously the storm bolters got bigger for some reason and look like shit.
Or his sword,
But
the sword also looks like shit. It's so big, it looks awful. Um okay, if we go to the multi-part Terminators, I would
it is
say
it's
similar.
kind of hard to tell how different they are, if the poses are substantially worse or different from the Leviathan ones, but
I
I
think
think
they're
they're worse.
worse. I mean, they look fine. Like if you look at this, the Terminator Captain here, his Stormbolter looks stupid because it's too big. His pose is too wide, which lessens the impact of the model. It makes them look smaller. So I don't like that. Um, the one walking forward looks pretty good, but to me it looks a little more awkward than the one walking forward from
I think you're
the
right.
previous set. This other dude who's kind of like leaning back in an unnatural pose, like it's fine, but it doesn't look right. And then yeah, these other
And they
two, like
just
there's
get
another
worse.
one walking forward, but it's like a bow-legged walk. So like that's
Yeah,
not
it's
good. And then
bad.
the dude with the assault cannon, it's just a very weird pose. It doesn't look like he's actually bracing himself or anything. It just looks weird. So
It
I would
looks a bit
say,
like the one pose from the old plastic Terminators, but maybe it
mhm.
looks a bit less braced. I, it's disappointing that they they're all bow-legged. Like, why do they need to be bow-legged? Like, your legs don't just stick out like that. Like, they go straight down. Like,
And no, you can't make the argument that it's because of the armor. Like it's not.
I don't like. What is wrong with their sculptors? Like,
Well, and it's not the sculptors. It's just this is what Space Marines look like, and this is
this
what
is what they
they're
want
told to do.
to do
Because
for
the
some reason.
artwork doesn't look like that.
Yeah, I just don't get it. Like, it
The
and
one
they were
striding forward to get the new Warp Tour canned water.
obviously, but it's so sad. Like, one of them has a fine pose, the others are bad. Like, what the fuck? Like, and
Hmm.
you know, in like 6 months they'll release an assault squad that the lightning claws will get bigger for some reason, and like all the weapons will look dumb, and they will have the exact same legs.
Yeah.
And it's just like they can never get better.
I
And
can't wait for the Dark Angels accessory pack that will have like a feather hanging down from a thing.
it'll look terrible. It's real sad. But I guess it comes down to it, like, I would like to convert one at some point to go with my Dark Angels. Like, I can't imagine there would be more than one because
Hmm.
it's just too much of a pain in the ass to do anything. I guess if we do convert a Stormbolter at him, we should try to cast it
Yeah.
such that it could be easily converted and, I don't know, make more. But it almost seems like we should just try to get the
But
Leviathan ones,
oh yeah,
maybe.
we should buy them off eBay. um.
And it will be interesting to see someone truly do a one-to-one comparison, because I think they are worse than the Leviathan ones, but they aren't like substantially worse.
Also, look at these other ones that they painted differently. There's maybe it's a white scar dude with a cyclone missile launcher. Look at that awful pose. Like you can't
Also,
tell
this
me
it
that's
looks like
cool.
the only thing I can say about it, that is so classic second edition and even first edition Space Marine pose. They all kind of look like that, like exactly like that.
No,
That awkward pose.
but their legs weren't like that. Their legs were straight down,
They were a lot more
a
straight
lot
down.
more
You're
straight
right.
down. So like they
They
still
still
looked
weren't straight
awkward,
down,
but they
but
still looked awkward, but they were
He
better.
looks like he's dancing. The
Yeah,
cyclone
he's
missile
like,
looks like he's dancing and really getting his groove on.
yeah. So the
I wonder, like,
Terminators.
do you think anyone in the world is talking about the Terminators like this and upset about the poses? Like, probably not.
Only the people who listen to us and our musings and
I
stuff.
just find that interesting,
Like I
'cause
yeah
I
I would
assume people
yeah I
are
would
like just
guess
singing the praises of this shit.
I would guess the only people thinking it are ones that have they saw these models and it's like the Wire brothers are gonna talk about their bow-legged poses and their big weapons and it's like we are, but
And for these, to me, the biggest disappointment is the poses. Like, we always
yes,
knew the Stormbolters were garbage, and like they couldn't do that better. Like, we just
no.
know Games Workshop being Games Workshop. They
The
could never
Cyclone
do
missile
better.
launcher is like so much larger than they've ever been. I feel the missiles are larger than they've ever been, and that isn't cooler.
No. But that's Games Workshop thing. That's how they, like, 90% of the time, that's how they design their models. They just make the shit bigger
Mhm.
for no reason other than bigger's
One thing that
better.
is interesting with these newer Terminators, they all have those little like side waist armor plates, which used to sort of be like a thing they added to the Assault Terminators.
Oh,
Yeah.
was that just the assault terminators that had them?
I think it was a separate thing you could glue on that's where, or no, that was the thing in the front. I don't remember.
Regardless, so they're kind of a disappointment,
Yeah, they
or they are a
sort of suck.
disappointment.
But they're fine.
We
They're
knew
better than the
we knew
old
it was
plastic
coming.
Terminators.
Yeah.
How are people feeling? Like, we could probably soon call the stream to a close and touch on some of this like next week or later on.
We
Yeah,
probably don't have much that we need to say about the assault squad.
Let's click on them and look at them briefly. I guess one big thing, I feel they just have to stop doing stuff with these scenic jumping off a rock poses. Like, I think they look terrible.
I
Yeah.
hate the pouches around with the straps around their legs. Like, why would they have leather bullshit like that on their like? I don't know. I think it looks
Yeah, it
bad.
looks, and to
Well,
me it looks like their heads are getting smaller.
Um, they might. Like, I think in general, the fact that their necks taper inward because they have the ball and socket joint looks bad. Like, they need to the
Get
taper
wider.
needs to be different. And
Yeah, that would help.
without it being different, they look bad.
I think some of these just look pretty bad because because they're so bell bottomed, and I know that's a Space Marine look, but like to me, a lot of them kind of look like they their spinal column has been broken such that they have no control over their legs and they're just hanging down there or
Mhm.
something. And it's
Yeah, I
weird.
don't like what
They
their
look
legs
just,
look like.
and it would probably always be hard to get it to look right, or and it would probably perhaps always look unnatural, but they just look really weird to me.
Well, it's
Tiny
They don't
fucking
interesting.
like.
heads.
It's also interesting that they don't have the squatting poses and their legs are hanging down more naturally, and I think overall that's good. But since they did all the shit with the rocks, make it look like they're leaping off of them and stuff, they look even more unnatural.
Like the one with the leather holster has like a single bolt round.
Yeah, like what the fuck is that?
That's a marksmanship badge or some shit.
Could be.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Something about these. And like they basically just made a new bigger jump pack. But like because
Yeah.
Primaris have these little fins, like they put those on. And like it just to me looks over designed. But this Raven Guard dude jumping off of a rock with a power fist, like he looks so awkward.
He looks like he
Why do they
was.
have the little thrusters on the backs of their shins?
Oh,
Or
do
like
they
the
have
back.
thrusters back there?
You can see it on the captain model.
Oh. The
And
captain
maybe only the
model.
captain
Oh
has
god.
this.
They don't all have that, do they? I god. I
I'm
really
sure they do.
you god, I hope they don't. Well, they
Why would
don't
they
have the
just put it on?
fins on the side of their
Yeah,
ankles.
so maybe they don't. I don't know. I
The
I think
captain
this would
is
have been,
terrible.
and they have extra detail on the chain sword, which just looks just bad. I I feel like if these were just redesigned normal Space Marines, like without the intercessor ones, there would have been the possibility of these looking kind of cool. But something about them basically just taking the intercessor models and pasting a bunch of shit on top of them, they they don't read as being cool.
Their feet
They
are
don't
too
look
big.
they don't look like a good design. I
Um
don't
the
know.
captain
They're not good.
the captain, he has like a cape or something. Like, what the fuck? That's stupid. And they decide to make him more majestic or whatever, they'll have the rock he's leaping off of be even taller. Um, that's not good.
Yeah, it's just bad design. Like to me, it's hard to because I bet so much of it, like the heads are the same size, like the bear helmeted ones.
Yeah.
The like the legs are exactly the same, just posed differently. But something about how these poses have come to be, they look worse. And it almost, to me, it's a bit like what we were talking about the Mark III armor, that even though it was basically just exactly the same as the Mark VI, just slightly reskinned, something about small changes here and there
Yeah, they
result
can go
in
a long way.
overall just like look bad. And I guess it just sort of looks phoned in. Like they didn't bring anything new design wise to the table, it seems. And like, oh, let's take the Reaver leather, like all the Reaver leather shit, and put them on there. Yeah, they're just not
I think
good.
for Space Marines, it would make a lot more sense if it wasn't always leather. If it was more like a nylon synthetic thing, like I think that would look better and make more sense.
Yeah, so these aren't good. I guess this is like in contrast to like the Terminators just making Terminators a new plastic design. And I guess the Scouts, they didn't like make a new Primaris Scout, they just remade the Scouts. So like that is nice. And I wish they did that for the assault squads. But and we probably don't have the time to talk about the Scouts, but they also kind of shit the bed there.
Yeah, we
Not
don't.
as bad as like the old plastic kit, but like they were so bad that like it couldn't have been worse than that. But I guess this just comes down to like I don't like the way Games Workshop is heading. I don't really like Games Workshop models, kind of.
Well, the
And
big
it's funny.
thing where they're headed, well, so they've always had horrible poses, and they really haven't gotten better with that. But in terms of where they're headed, is they're headed with making models with smaller and smaller heads and bigger feet. That's that's the main thing.
I just don't like their stylistic bent and where they're going. This is funny, a quick aside. I This will be coming in a month or two through the 38 or the 32 podcast, like 28 magazines podcast. I interviewed Miscast or Trent from Miscast, the YouTube channel. And at some point he talks about like how good Games Workshop has got with their sculptors and such, and that like he kind of just does sort of shoddy conversions and usually just makes these perfect models worse. And I see where he's coming from. Like a lot of his design choices and stuff are like kind of making stuff look a little bad, look a bit more like an old Hammer thing to get that charm. But I didn't have the heart to say that like their models just aren't perfect. They're nowhere close to it, at least
Yeah,
from my design aesthetic. And it's
that's
just
sort of
their
what I feel
design
too.
aesthetic is generally just moving further and further away from what I like, I feel.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Like virtually every model we see shows that,
They're
except
becoming
for
more and
every
more
now and
like
again.
Malifaux,
Yeah. But yeah, I
which
don't
is
know. I just thought
sad.
it was weird. And I didn't say anything in the interview because, like, I want to hear their thoughts and stuff. But
Yeah.
I just don't like. Because the funny thing is, like, they're trying to make the models better, more tactical, and
Mm.
more they don't want them to be the comical old hammer look, which was partially that way because of limitations in technology and casting abilities and things like that. But despite having these huge advances in 3D sculpting and abilities to make better sprues and cut them up in ways that they can get better definition, they still maintain a lot of the wonkiness that doesn't have to be there, but it's almost like Games Workshop has settled on that that's just an integral part of their stuff. Even though they've moved away from that in their like art style and illustrations and have been long away from that, but they
Yeah.
like inherently include this wonky bullshit. And it like I almost feel like they don't realize it.
I think they
It's just
don't realize their poses are horrible.
yeah.
Like, because so many of the things, like, they people talk about how, like, oh, and that's a dynamic pose, and like very rarely would I say Games Workshop has a dynamic pose. They're just
There's no
crouching,
subtlety in it.
squatting. Yeah, like, unless Brian
Standing in the
Nelson
rock.
sculpted it, the pose probably is bad.
Like this one that looks the assault marine that's been up the screen for a while that looks like he doesn't have feeling in his bottom legs. And for some reason, his head is like craned forward awkwardly for just some reason. I mean, I guess he probably didn't have to be glued that way, but
Yeah.
this is another case of like too much posability results in badly assembled models, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to ruin them. Like,
I
very
don't know.
subtle changes in positioning really can go a long way on a
Yeah, just
model.
all this stuff, I guess it comes down to it seems like a very phoned in safe thing they did for Space Marines.
Let's stop talking about these.
Yeah.
Let's go to bed.
Yeah, I think that's fine. um, well, so I guess thanks everybody for joining us tonight. Hopefully you got something out of our rant and rambles. Um,
Yeah, maybe it will convince you that you just don't need to buy some of these models when they come out,
yeah.
and that
Um,
would be probably good for you.
yeah, but yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, keep on enjoying the hobby, and we will talk to you again soon. Over and out.
Yep, yeah. See everybody.